Welcome to The Eternal Quest. My name is Paul Meyer. In 1945, after the invention of the atomic bomb, Dr. Albert Einstein observed that for mankind to survive, we must radically change our thinking. Now, nearly 50 years later, it is sadly evident that we have not done so. The evidence is all around us. While much good has undeniably been done, we must now face the consequences of years of neglect of our planet. Our program today features Dr. Henryk Skolimowski, professor at the University of Michigan and director of the EcoPhilosophy Center at Ann Arbor. Dr. Henryk Skolimowski has spent more than 15 years finding new ways in which we may save our planet. He has developed an eco-philosophy which provides a conceptual framework for developing a new worldview. He takes serious issue with the mechanistic approach which views our planet as merely a collection of resources available for our exploitation. He suggests a more holistic approach, a more reverent attitude towards our planet. Dr. Skolimowski discusses his eco-philosophy with Bill Metzger, editor of the Quest magazine.
You've been speaking and writing about eco-philosophy for a lot longer than just about anybody I know. But there's a growing interest in the field today, isn't there?
There is indeed, and people are not only more sympathetically inclined towards eco-philosophy and a broader ecological reflection, but also realize that the ecological and environmental problems will not go away by themselves, that they will require a concerted effort on our part to do something about our predicaments, not only on the superficial level of trying to find fixes, technological fixes, because we have tried those and they do not work. And also it is realized that traditional philosophy and also contemporary philosophy, contemporary academic philosophy, should we say, very pedantic and logically and analytically oriented, is not helping us much. Out of the realization that many of our problems have deeper roots, people are beginning to accept ecological philosophy as good news. But for the moment, I must add, it is on a rather superficial level. They accept it as good news and somehow expect eco-philosophy to work for them, rather than assume that they have to work for it. And that is partly a problem of our heritage, of our ecological legacy, of our technological legacy, rather. We have somehow evolved the idea that technology is a savior and that it will provide a fix for us, one way or another, while we can sit and watch our television. Yeah. This may be a larger legacy, which is, I think, rooted in our Judeo-Christian tradition. Somehow we expect the Messiah to come from outside and save us. And this messianic tradition has been projected on technology, and technology is now going to do this the act of saving. However, as we can see, it is not going to work like that. We have the responsibility to clean up the planet.
And you've written that neither Christianity nor Marxism, for example, have provided us with a view that's particularly helpful in this area. So eco-philosophy is kind of an alternative metaphor that you've offered for us, a kind of a new worldview.
That's right, an alternative conceptual framework, also an alternative value system, as well as a metaphor. If we reduce worldviews to metaphors, you can say that the mechanistic or materialist modern worldview is based on the conception of the universe, the conception of the world as a machine. And how do you behave if you are convinced, or if you are convinced that you are within a machine? Well, you try to manipulate this machine, and sooner or later you try to think about yourself as a machine. And that is a kind of disastrous consequence of this whole modern worldview, that it encouraged us to manipulate the world as a machine, but also encouraged us to look at ourselves and all other creatures as pulleys and wheels of a machine, and encouraged us finally to treat human beings as a machine. Mm-hmm. So instead of this metaphor, eco-philosophy starts with a totally different metaphor. Mm-hmm. The world as a sanctuary. Once you are given the notion that the world may be conceived as a sanctuary, immediately your role in this world changes. For how do you behave in a sanctuary? Reverentially, by taking responsibility for it, by realizing that we are not just mindless technicians overlooking a deterministic machine, but rather that we are stewards and guardians of something awesomely beautiful. With mechanistic thinking, you have an object out there which is detached from you. If you push it as it has been pushed in our academia, you have an object which you dissect, you cut. You want to examine what is a frog. You put it into lab, you cut it into pieces. And what you end up with is a dead frog, not a frog as you would like to study it. In a sense, we torture life in the mortuary of our analytical thinking. That is, in essence, mechanistic thinking. Reverential thinking, on the contrary, beholds life as something sacred and tries to understand it through empathy, through compassion. We do not want to throw out analytical thinking altogether, but realize that there is a beauty in thinking through compassion, by trying to understand another being for what he is, she is, it is, by trying to see its universe in its own terms, by trying to behold it compassionately, by trying to realize that there is much more to understanding than merely analytical understanding. Because the greatest insights into the nature of life and the nature of the universe are not born of analytical scrutiny, are based on those extraordinary insights that something is suddenly revealed to us and others by those insights. And those insights are often by trying to empathize with another being, with another object, or with the universe, and trying to be it. See, when we are analyzing things objectively, mechanistically, we are never this object. This object is separated from us. While in reverential thinking, we are beholding it. We are becoming it and try to understand it from within.
Could you give us examples of any individuals who represent this reverential view?
In our times, you mean?
Yes.
Well, there are many, and most of the time they pass unrecognized. If you want some towering figures who show what a reverential thinking can be and who act in this world and inspire others, there are at least 3 such towering figures. One is Mother Teresa. Reverential, compassionate thinking, trying to understand that the greatest misery is not material deprivation, but being forgotten by everybody, by being completely neglected, by not being treated as a person, by having at least the comfort of dying, knowing that somebody cares. We have, in a sense, brought back the human status, the dignity to those individuals that have been discarded. Caring for others to the point that they really know it. That is reverence in action.
Yes.
Another person that has exemplified it in a much more austere way, though, is Krishnamurti, by challenging everybody and saying, you are your own saviors. You can find a solution with your own hearts and souls. Go deeper into yourself instead of being mesmerized with those trivial, superficial thrills. Mm-hmm. And yet another person on this scale of a whole society is Gandhi. The capacity to empathize with the poor and with the whole world. And the idea of non-violence, that is very much in the nature of reverential thinking. While this objective thinking, analytical thinking, is so often violent. And this contrast could not be greater. Inadvertently, when we put the world or a frog on a plate and try to cut it, that is a kind of extension of our aggression towards the world.
Yes.
And reverential thinking is healing thinking. Whatever heals is reverential thinking. That could be as good a definition as any.
Now, at the EcoPhilosophy Center, what are your activities? What programs are you engaged in?
Well, for the moment, it is mainly the battle for the minds, because I think that the basic thing is to change our thinking. So EcoPhilosophy Center offers lectures, seminars, workshops, and tries to make people aware that there is an alternative. Indeed, that there are many alternatives. But unfortunately, there is so much rubbish around us, so much noise, so much mental pollution, that many of good ideas do not have a chance to be heard because they are simply pushed to the margin, overwhelmed by mental pollution and by noise rubbish. So it is important to have your voice heard. We have to take on the whole world. And there are some bad environmental problems, such as the pollution of air, pollution of water, such as puncture of the ozone layer. But I do not think that any of them is more important than any other. And what is really at stake is the kind of thinking that has led to those problems, the kind of thinking that is finally responsible, and the kind of action that led us to many of the disasters, which are not isolated mishaps. They are simply the consequences of a certain way of looking at the world, of a certain way of thinking about it, and a certain way of acting about it. So what we really try to emphasize in the ecology centers and also in our workshops and lectures is to see the clear connection that how we act is related to what our thinking is related to what our picture of the world is. Let it be acknowledged that to develop reverential thinking would require a new kind of training. And I call it eco-yoga. The way we work on our mind so that it changes its atomizing, clinical, cutting, analytical thinking into the way that results in reverential and compassionate thinking. And just as a kind of aside, I have developed this eco-yoga, and I am offering workshops on eco-philosophy and eco-yoga in which reverential thinking, reverential perception, and reverential view of the world is practiced as a form of spiritual exercise and also an existential exercise. We are as based on a certain canvas of myths as other civilizations. For example, the myth of progress. Only recently it has started to be challenged. The myth that we can somehow find a material amelioration to all our problems, and that through materialistic improvements we can solve our problems. Mm-hmm. Those are simply myths which we just accepted because somehow we like them. And now those myths are collapsing, and we have to find new ways of thinking about our problems, and indeed new myths.
It seems as though the collapse is occurring on a really global scale now too, given the changes in Eastern Europe and so forth. Have these changes kind of accelerated the concern for the environment?
Well, perhaps they have not accelerated our thinking about the environment, but they have done something for us. I think that the end of the Cold War has had at least two positive consequences. One is to release us from a certain psychological bondage, because we have been so much directed towards containing communism and always thinking about the threat from outside that we often forgot to look at ourselves. And if there were some problems within our own country, with our own society, so often we would say, but look at them, how bad it is there.
Yes.
Well, this external enemy is no longer there. And now we have to look at our own problems and realize that they are quite formidable. And that is partly a a salutary effect of the end of the Cold War. We now need to look at our own courtyard and see that not all is well, and do not use the excuse of containing communism for overlooking our own shortcomings and our own, well, imperfections, to say nothing of disasters. This enormous military expenses which we all supported because it was to contain this beast of communism. Now we know that it is unnecessary, and if we are determined, we could use the peace dividends wisely, that is to say, towards ameliorating society and towards healing the planet and ourselves. Because it's not only a question of healing the planet, it's also a question of healing ourselves. But we have to be aware that we are now controlling the military and not the other way around, because the burden of the deficit is enormous. And this burden can be clearly traced to the fact that we increased our military expenditure year by year by an enormous margin. And if we eliminate or cut on military expenses, we shall eliminate the deficit. And it could be a very salutary aspect of the end of the Cold War. Mm-hmm. However, I do not yet see any kind of positive agenda that has emerged since the end of the Cold War. What I think is necessary is a declaration of environmental peace as a global effort. And indeed, Gorbachev made a similar proposal in the United Nations when he suggested that we now need a council for ecological reconstruction on the global scale. Mm-hmm. At first, it was very well received by everybody, but then everybody got busy and bogged down in
distracted
in their own smaller problems, and the initiative is on the table, at least recorded in the annals of the United Nations.
You've used the term greening, a greening of consciousness that is occurring in our times, and it seems that maybe part of that is happening in the community of nations now, as well as just in individual countries.
Well, I should like to think that they are greening as well, but the more entrenched the system, the more entrenched a political figure, the less flexible the institution or the person is. So there is a great deal of lip service paid to the environment. But then when their actions are examined, those new converts to environmentalism are not as enlightened, not as green as we would like to have them. But the very fact that they have spoken for the environment really commits them, and words become important and they leave certain legacy. So anybody who wants to say some good words in their respective countries can say, well, as our respected leaders have said, yes, we must take care of the environment, and I'm only following what they have tried to do, and maybe they are too busy with their own high political actions. We now have to take smaller particular actions in our hand and do the work they meant to do, but they, yes, are too busy.
Leaders of developed countries who've been speaking about the need to change ways of behavior are running into the situation that they're trying now to get countries that are just beginning to move into that developmental scale to change their behavior to help solve the problems that we have created effectively.
That's right.
And so the undeveloped and underdeveloped countries are saying, wait a minute, give us an opportunity to develop some too. And this
that is one of the big problems which starts from our effort to save those forests in the Amazonian basin, which are so important, those forests, to all of us, and we understand the argument. However, the Brazilians do not think in those terms. They say, wait a minute, why are our forests so important to you? Because you have destroyed your own forest. Mm-hmm. Now you have done all the destruction, and now you want us to save our forest for you. And there are some very interesting proposals by Brazilian scholars, partly in serious, partly in jest. And the argument was, well, if those forests are so important to you, what about the oxygen tax? You are breathing free oxygen produced buy our forest. What if we tax you on this oxygen?
Pay Brazil an oxygen tax.
That's right, and that really makes us a bit nervous, because there is something in it, although we assume that air is for free.
Sure.
And also, it can be seen in many other ways that we want to contain smaller nations and prevent them from repeating our mistakes. But they often interpret the action as we prevent them from attaining our standard of living. And we have not yet found any kind of equitable solution. For development is very important in those nations, and it is not a question whether to develop or not to develop, but how to develop. And we have to help them with this development. But what is important that, again, economists and technicians, those who are in control of high-tech, do not get the upper hand. So, extending my eco-philosophy, I have proposed the concept of reverential development.
Mm-hmm.
If we start with a reverential attitude, then we immediately look differently at the forest and all the other industry that we bring about, because reverential development means reverence for the forest, reverence for all the creatures that are there, including the natives in Brazil and elsewhere. And that is something that needs to be somehow reflected upon. For what we are really talking about is a spiritual approach to further progress and development. And this kind of thinking is not unknown in the history of humanity. After all, the compassionate thinking of Buddhism is very similar in nature.
Yes, it's all been there.
That's right. And Christian thinking infused with love is a very similar kind of thinking as well. Well, perhaps we need a new language for our time, so I call it reverential thinking. What I'm insisting that it is not something that is alien to our nature. Because when we love, when we cherish a friend, we think about him or her reverentially. And therefore this reverential thinking is a part of our status as human beings. I want to elevate this kind of thinking to a level of ordinary thinking, so that we really go through life in kind of awe and rapture, thinking reverentially about everything there is.
Oh, we need to get it into our educational system.
Precisely.
And into our politics.
Well, that it would help politicians quite a lot, because so often they are just mindless representatives of this destructive thinking, which tries to diminish their opposition without doing much good to themselves. What we want are good men and women that shine with their own qualities. What we get are clever, manipulative technicians that are clever with words to diminish their opponents. And insofar as they do it, we see it through. They diminish themselves in our eyes. Mm-hmm. And hence we have a kind of great nation with very mediocre leaders. And that is part of this whole spectacle of thinking that really debases what is around us and what is possible, rather than elevates it.
Do you have some specific suggestions?
Well, there are many.
What can we do?
Well, first of all, not to allow ourselves to be overrun by nihilism on the individual level, because there is a tendency to accept that we are helpless. That is
There's nothing we can do.
That is the first premise to capitulation. Mm-hmm. Second, to realize that the healing must start with ourselves. That is to say, we have to have enough center within ourselves, enough peace of mind to reflect on who we are and how we ourselves contribute to this disastrous equation, because it is often our action. Although we think that we are not responsible for it, but by being driven by the mindless stream, we are contributing to it. So I would suggest we have to allow ourselves more space and time for reflection. We must not allow ourselves to be always pushed and make to rush. One of the principles of eco-philosophy is that rushing is against grace. And it's very important to just realize that we are just running in circles. And that we mustn't blame politicians, our inadequate technologies, because we are part of the equation. Through our actions, mindful or mindless, we are co-contributing to what is. And it's our thinking that perpetuates the disease. And the disease is not a small technical disease, it is a larger civilizational disease. It is a disease of a culture that has embarked on a wrong kind of thinking. A thinking that is completely separated from the sacred, from reverence, ultimately atomizes and destroys the world. So we need the kind of thinking which is reverential and which is holistic and participatory. So often we think that we cannot do anything, so we disengage ourselves from problems, from participating in life. But life is participation. We are taking our responsibility insofar as we are prepared to participate. And participating on all levels of our existence is what makes us responsible and what ultimately fulfills us. For the problem with the technological society has been that it has been disengaging us from participation in various aspects of life. Mm-hmm. We have to reclaim this participation.
Yes.
And often when I am told that I am too idealistic, that I must accept the world as it is, I respond to such claims that Goethe thought otherwise. And Goethe's words were as follows: to treat man as he is to debase him. To treat man as he ought to be is to engrace him. It is precisely because we too often treat other people as they are that we just lower them.
Yes.
And I would extend Goethe's saying into one that embraces the world. To treat the world as it is to debase it. To treat the world as it ought to be is to engrace it. And this is, in a nutshell, a message of eco-philosophy.